Caesar's Palace, Windsor, Ontario.
So you know what's funny?
Grittiest sauna ever. Caesar's Palace, Windsor, Ontario.
Did you like it this morning?
I went last night. I just like popped in and they had they had like a sauna like in the room, but it was like it was gritty. But yeah, I did that, a couple of rounds in the cold showers and then in the wrapper. It's great.
Did you hit the tables at all or no?
There are a few things in life that I find like less attractive than like casino. I was telling Dan when he picked me up this morning, like there's people at the slot machines. I couldn't believe, because I had to walk through the casino to get out, and there was people like already, and I don't know if they were like getting started or if they just hadn't left.
People don't sleep there. People don't sleep. Like you can go all. So my dad plays in a band, so he plays there or used to play there frequently. My sister too.
Yeah.
So
your family's really
all musical. So we go there. It's like a thing to hang out and do, but like the people watching is unbelievable. Like you don't get any better. There's no better quality people watching time than at the casino.
Oh my God. Like,
so,
I don't know, like last night, I don't know if it was an event or just people were showing up, but like they had like that sort of like the lobby bar, I guess. And they've got a stage in behind the bar.
Yeah.
And it was,
that's where they play.
It was jammed.
Typically, yeah.
Last night it was jammed.
Yeah. So I don't know if there was they have the Coliseum shows too. So that's like the big stage. So they have stuff like rolling there all the time. That's where like the high roller acts go. If, there's like whatever bands or whatever
it's crazy though. Like just walking through there, you see all the posters and stuff, and it's like it's like back to back to back. There's stuff going all the time, and it's a huge building.
Yeah, huge. Well,
so
we were talking about
15 minutes to walk out of there.
Oh yeah. Well, we were talking about it on Saturday. How like it could be great down there. Like it could be great. Like it's right on the border.
Dan gave me like
waterfront.
The driving tour of like Windsor, but he was showing me even. Because from my room, I could see like the old Spitz rink. And I'm like, oh man, like what a setup like that would be if it was downtown. And then like this morning at the gym, you overlook like Detroit. And I didn't realize there was all that green space along the river. I'm like, this is awesome.
Yeah. That's actually one, they did a nice job with the waterfront. Like when I was a kid, it wasn't like that. But they did a nice job like kind of turning that part around. But now you get a couple blocks in from the actual riverfront and it's like, what's going on here, man? But it has. But
then it gets nice again. Yes. Also, like that because he showed me. Is it? It's not Weiser's Walker. Is that
Hiram Walker? Yeah,
Hiram Walker. And then he showed me like I got like pictures. I think he said like it was like Al Capone's old house and stuff that's for sale right now.
Well, it was like a big prohibition, like running booze back and forth town, right? So yeah, it's pretty wild, man.
It's a hidden gem, Windsor, Ontario.
Have you been here before? Or no, is this your first time? Windsor?
You know what? So I've been here when I coached at UBC. I'd come out once a year to watch the OHL, and I would usually kind of do like a Sarnia, Windsor, London loop, and but I couldn't tell you where like the Spitz rink is, but I just would go in and out from there. And then a couple of years ago, it must have been something related to our conference in Ann Arbour, and we just needed a place to crash, and we had booked this hotel along the highway in Windsor. And I can't remember, we showed up there and it's like the room wasn't ready or there was some sort of mix up. And I was just like, went to one of my staff, I'm like, find us another place to stay. And he's like, do you want to stay at Caesar's Casino? I'm like, there's like, where? He's like, in Windsor. And I'm like, yes, let's do that. And so we, then we hung out. We had a night like downtown, went out for dinner and all that. And cool. Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah. So how much of your time do you spend buzzing around? Because you're originally from BC? Or do you live there now?
BC, yeah.
So how much of your time, like, so after this, do you get to go home or are you off to the next place?
No, I'll go home today. And then, you know what? I try and schedule it. I'm kind of like one trip a month just for family and stuff like that. Make sure the start of the season's pretty busy for us. And then generally, unless there's something really important that I've got to go to, kind of January, February where we live. We're like in, there's Vancouver, there's Whistler, and there's a town called Squamish, which is in between. That's where I live. So in January and February, just, my little guy skis in ski school. I try to get up there with him as much as possible. So just try, and that's kind of family time. But yeah, it's cool though. Like, you know what? It's, this is what I would say. It's so interesting. And I mean, for one, like this setup you guys got here, this is amazing. it's just so interesting to me, like how different hockey is in different parts of the world. Like I think we're just programmed to think the way it is, like how we grew up or where we live. But yeah, it's different everywhere, man, and you learn something new every time.
So yeah, so I want to, because I want to ask you about that. Actually, I was going to get into, which I'll get into it now, just because you brought it up. So for just, I'm going to give you a proper intro when I play it out. But so for people that don't know, that you started the coaches site, and first I want to know how that came to be, because I want to get into that exact question of you. So for example, I listened to Matt Dumichel talk about all these different club systems from around the world and all these things. So one, I want to know first how you got into it, because then I want to lead into what you're seeing now from that exact perspective on how coaching is different in different places. So start with how you got into it first, like how the coaches site came to be like an idea and a thing you wanted to do, and then I'll branch it into that.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it.
You don't have to. You can ramble on.
Yeah, well, so I had coached in the BCHL and Junior B in BC for a number of years. So in my 20s, like I was moving. I think the longest I lived anywhere was 2 years. And if you had to ask me at that time, I would have said my goal was to be an NHL coach. Two of the most pivotal times in my life, when I was 18, I realized I wasn't going to be a pro hockey player, and that was a kick in the shins. And then when I was 30 years old, I realized I wasn't going to be a professional coach. That was also a kick in the shins. But I in 2008, I'd been in Penticton in the BCHL. We won a championship, got hired as an assistant coach with UBC, and moved down there. And I couldn't even tell you today like how I got this opportunity, but I became a coach mentor for Vancouver minor hockey. So that included like going out to practices, and I would do these seminars, like a handful throughout the year. And I think what's unique about coaching everywhere is predominantly you get people that are super passionate, they're super committed, and they have the best intentions. And that was certainly the case with the coaches I was working with there. But what struck me was that they were doing the same things that my coaches did with me when I was growing up. And it became really apparent that there was sort of this vacuum of information, whereas like in junior hockey, college hockey, pro hockey, coaches talked all the time. They shared ideas. But it seemed like in minor hockey, everybody kept their cards close to their chest. So, I mentioned when I was 30, I realized I did 2 years at UBC. I kind of stepped back and said, okay, like, what's the trajectory for me if I want to like actually like have a career and earn a living that's going to allow me, to have a family and do things like that. And I was like, this doesn't seem like the thing to put all my chips in the table for. So I had to figure out what to do. And while I did that, I figured I would start a coaching conference in Vancouver, not as a business. It was solely, for me, it was a way for me to stay involved with the game. It would be a chance for me in the summer to have some buddies come back, hang out with them. They could, present. And I thought it would really add value just to our local minor hockey scene, because there wasn't really anything. I think at the time, Roger Nielsen was run here out of Windsor.
Yeah, I remember him, yeah.
But obviously that was a big hike. So it was just something, in that part of the world to help coaches. And, I would also preface this by saying, like, I wasn't qualified to organize a 10-year-old's birthday party at the time. Like, I had to go to like the hotel, rent the rooms, like had no clue what I was doing. But we did it our first year. We had 98 coaches show up. And gosh, I'm trying to think who we had that year. We had our first ever presenter was Ryan Huska, the Calgary Flames. He was with the Kelowna Rockets at the time. Ray Ferrero spoke that year.
So you had like some good, like, because that was gonna be my next question. Like, you had some actual like relatively well-known speakers right off the hop.
Yeah, but at the time, like, Ryan wasn't a big name speaker.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? We had, who else? We had Kevin Constantine, who was with Everett at the time, and that's probably been like, listen, I mean, there's been so many cool aspects of this journey, but one of them has absolutely been like, the opportunity to work with a lot of these coaches on their way up, because you appreciate the commitment, the grind, like just the sacrifices their families make, all of that. So when you see Ryan Huska become a head coach in the NHL, like, man, you're so pumped for him, But anyway, so second year, we had 200 coaches show up. I think that year we had like Hitchcock, Mike Keenan, and people started flying in. At this point, it was like all word of mouth. So
and what year would this have been?
The first year was 2011. And I think it was in 2012, like, just, again, this was very much a hobby. and somebody's like, hey, you should start a blog. I'm like, what's a blog? And they're like, oh, it's like you just like put content up and stuff so people can find you. So I started like a blog, and somebody's like, you should get on Twitter. And so like I got on Twitter. Again, not really knowing what we're doing, but like I'll also know too, like that first year, I lost $16,000 on the conference at a time when like I had no money.
Yeah.
So I had to get up at 5 a.m. to go to the Richmond Ice Center to do lessons. I did decamps. I did that, I think 6 days a week for a whole season to pay that off. And I can remember my mom and stuff, like, she's like, why would you possibly think about doing this again? And I'm like, I really like this. And I think it's like, this is going to be my way to stay involved in hockey. But yeah, anyways, fast forward, we do the blog. And then kind of one of the pivotal moments was I got a call out of the blue from a guy named Ken McDonald, who at the time was the chief growth officer for Team Snap. And he called me up and he's like, hey, we've had the most conversions in Canada off your blog through Google AdWords. And I was like, what's Google AdWords? And he's like, it just kind of pauses, and he's like, okay. He's like, listen, we saw that you do a conference. Do you have sponsorship for the conference? And we didn't. And I was like, yes. And he's like, how much is that? And I would just like pause. I'm like, $1,200. Yeah. And he's like, that's it? And I'm like, man. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, we'll see you at the conference. So Team Snap, I think it was with 2 years later, they bought the naming rights to the conference. So for a while, it was the Team Snap Hockey Coaches Conference. But what became really evident at that point is there was this sort of influx of sports technologies generally that were starting at the higher levels, and they wanted a way to kind of, connect with people at the grassroots level and just recognize that there was going to be a bit of a shift where, sports was changing, youth sports was changing. And whether it was, looking for efficiencies for volunteers or ways to enhance player development, that this was going to be a thing, and that there was going to need to be a market for these startups or organizations to kind of showcase what they were up to.
That's sweet, man. So at what point did it turn into? Because I'm assuming you don't have a tech background, so.
No.
Yeah. So when you turn, now we were talking about turning this into like a platform.
Eric, I feel like I'm at NASA right now with your setup. Yeah.
That's what Andy, my partner, would say too, man. He doesn't know one thing about this stuff. But so it went from you're on a blog just throwing up whatever you're thinking about writing or that you can find, and now you want to turn this more into like an actual platform. So that's like a pretty big jump from like I'm running a conference to I'm going to turn this into like a distribution platform for content online, right?
Yeah. So it's a funny story. Like my wife's in marketing, and she works with Lululemon now, but at the time, she worked for this company called Delari. So it's like an automotive dealership across Western Canada. And she did all the media buying. And she spent a lot of money with Rogers Media. So she got invited to this retreat in Cancun, Mexico. And she was allowed to bring a +1. Fortunately, I'm the +1. And we go down there. And there's another guy on the trip named Di Manuel. And Di was the COO at the time of Fitness Town. But he also had the #1 fitness blog in Canada. So we're literally just like hanging out by the pool, small talk. What do you do? And, at the time I was, doing a lot of hockey development. I was going back and forth to China. The coach's site was kind of just, again, it was a hobby. But he started he took an interest in it. And he said, do you videotape the presentations? And we did. And he's like, well, what do you do with them? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, it just, like, we do it because it feels like the right thing to do, but they're like literally just sitting on a hard drive somewhere. And he's like, you should start a membership site. And I'm like, what's that? He's like, have you heard of Netflix? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, it's like Netflix. You could be Netflix for hockey. And he kind of like literally like on the poolside, probably on a cocktail napkin, like sketched this whole thing out. So I go back to Vancouver and I get connected with this guy who can build a website. Like we would have been using like a WordPress blog at the time. And so we go get all these videos, we get them edited, might even be a stretch, but we turn them into like something we can put online. We build a site. And again, like this is a hobby, so I wasn't really hands-on. Finally, the site's ready. I look at it and I'm like, this is terrible. Like it just wasn't a good user experience. The branding was off. Like nothing about it looked professional. And but it had the coach's site URL. And again, not being, a technologist, I just thought like, well, we're not going to talk about it, so nobody's going to find it. So the guy that built it, I said, look, like we gotta, circle the wagons. We're gonna start from scratch again and do something that, I'd kind of be proud to show my pals. And a couple weeks go by and he calls me and he's like, hey, Aaron, he's like, I know you don't like the website, but we've had signups. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, we've had almost 100 people sign up. Like, visit the site. He's like, no, like they've paid money. Like they put their credit card down and they're signing up to watch the videos. I'm like, you're kidding me. Like we haven't done anything. So at that point, like that's where I was like, I'm like, hey, like let's speed this up. Like how quickly can we get a site out there? So we eventually we redo it. We get our site. And at the time it was sort of a combination of like, there was some articles and yeah. And we just started growing a bit of a following and it was crazy. All of a sudden we got on, Google Analytics and started tuning into that. And we're like, holy cow, like people are coming in from like all over the world to see this content. And it was, it was, again, for something that, again, there was zero intention for it to become that. It was, that was a pretty cool moment in time. Yeah.
So from that, so I'm super interested now in like, so you realize that there's people from all over the world that are interested in this. And to your point, they said a few minutes ago, like how different hockey is in different areas is like
Sure.
one of the most interesting things you're finding. So how hands-on are you in really getting into the nitty-gritty of what they're doing in Sweden versus what they're doing in the States versus Canada or different parts of those countries? Are you like pretty dialed into what's happening there, or are you kind of just so if you are, then what do you notice? Are there anything that stands out to you about the coaching styles or coaching qualities, or what the focus is on coaching in different countries or different areas, and like maybe bridging the gap for people that are in Canada or the US? Like what are some of the interesting points that you've noticed?
So I would say the first thing, particularly if we're talking about like North America compared to Europe, and granted, a lot of the youth system in Europe is controlled by the clubs, meaning there's a professional team and they obviously run the professional team, but they run the farm team and they run the youth system all the way down. So like, very much a soccer model where your goal is you're trying to develop players that are eventually going to play on your pro team. So the fact that, that just equates to more resources, a lot of mostly full-time coaches. So, there's certainly that sort of fundamental difference. But I would say the number one thing that stands out to me, like when you sign your kid up for hockey, it's kind of like going to school. Like they're going to tell you, like when your child is 6, they're going to work on these skills, and that's going to allow them to graduate to here. And you can look at that. I mean, you're going to know what your child or your kid's going to be doing when they're 14. And so again, very similar to an education model. You can sort of chart that path. There's a lot of transparency. And I think that's really helpful, certainly for parents. But I think that from a developmental perspective, I would say that universally, the best development programs that we come across have some element of that where they have a very clearly defined development model. And listen, you and I could argue all day about like what's the best forecheck. It's not that. It's very much how are we going to teach kids the fundamental skills? What are the teaching cues? What's the language we're going to use? And it's consistent and there's alignment amongst the coaches. And I would say that is, in my opinion, that is the secret sauce to player development, and it's free.
Yeah. So if you go to name whichever club is your favorite or whichever example is your favorite, if you go there and say, hey, what do you guys do? Are they giving you a package where it's like written down, or is it just a philosophy that everyone's already bought into? Is it so how explicit is it that people can really grasp what they're doing, as opposed to maybe I'm the leader of this organization, this is what I think, I enforce it top down and everyone buys in? Or is it like, this is what it is, read it?
So I'll give you 2 examples. We were over at the World Championships in Tampere, Finland, 2 years ago, I guess. And Jokerit is a club that we work with, and so we got a tour of their facilities, and we went into their office, and they said, "Do you want to see our development model?" And I said, "Yeah, but not really." I'm like, "Huh? Like how do you see
Yeah,
a
how do you see
development
that,
model?"
right?
So they, we're sitting around a board room, and they plug in their computer. They take us through their development. Like we were there for an hour. Like it was so granular, like from every detail, every skill, who's teaching it, and and it was really clear. Like if you're a coach in that program, like you're either on the bus or you're off the bus. And they had I think the one thing that stood out to me, and this might be maybe even more of a an indication of culture, like in Europe, the coaches there seemed a lot more comfortable being a part of something bigger than themselves, meaning like it wasn't about them winning or the recognition that they would get. Like they really felt like I've got this responsibility. If I'm teaching, you know 10-year olds, I take a lot. I'm not taking, my pride comes from developing that player, and for the coach of the 11-year olds to come to me like the next year and say, "Hey, you did a great job," and that they felt that they were sort of almost like just a spoke in the wheel of this player development model. And so I think that in itself is probably really powerful. And the other thing that really stood out is, again, a little bit different because a lot of the coaches, it was either a job or there was, it wasn't necessarily volunteer based, but the clubs were like, if you were really good at working with 8-year-olds, then you just worked with 8-year-olds. So like we had once hosted some coaches in Vancouver from Djurgården in Sweden, and all the coaches there, like they generally worked in cycles, meaning like one coach, and he was in his early 70s, and he'd been coaching for
Really?
40 years.
Holy.
And he's like, I take a group of 6-year-olds and I take them to 8, and then I start again every 3-year cycle.
So there's not like there's not a lot of cross responsibilities where like the guy that does the 6 to 8 year olds is also the skating coach for the 14-year-olds and does video. Like it's you have your responsibilities within that. Like it's not a ton of crossover from.
Sure. And I think there's certainly some, I think some various in some of those areas, but I would say for the most part, it's like they find specialists. And if you're really good working with kids, because I think for anybody that's coached, like, I mean, I coach my little guy in U7, like, I've coached for a long time. That was a learning experience. Like I needed a whole new toolbox for that. So I think they're really mindful of like, it's not just the technical knowledge, but it's like, how do you just connect with kids? Like, like, listen, there's probably a lot of NHL coaches out there that probably don't feel super cozy or comfortable on the ice with a group of 8-year-olds, but some people do, and that's their superpower. So let them deal with that, and really focus on their strengths. Um, I think another really good example of like that sort of, that development model, Frolunda, who, are, if they're not the gold standard for player development, they're right up there with anybody in the world. And so Tobias Johansson, who's now the head coach of the Norwegian national team, he used to be the coach of their U20 team, and oversaw their player development. And I think he told this story on my podcast, but it was the draft, and I might get the year wrong. The draft was in Dallas. I'm pretty sure it was 2018, and Rasmus Dahlin was the first overall pick for Lunda kid, right? So he's like, yeah, like all the coaches, they get, the club flies into Dallas, but the club had an objective to have 3 NHL draft picks per year. And so they go out there, so the draft, the first round's on the Friday, the rest of the draft takes place on the Saturday. So the coaches go out there. Obviously, it's a big celebration. Rasmus gets drafted. They have a couple kids that are in the mix. They go and celebrate on Friday night. The rest of the draft hits on Saturday. No other Finland players get picked. They're flying home on Sunday. And he says, they get up on Sunday and they'll have an email from Roger Ronberg, who's the head coach of the pro team and kind of oversees the program. And he's like, hey, everybody, hope you all enjoyed your time in Dallas. Just want to wish everybody a safe flight home. We're going to have a staff meeting on Tuesday because our development model is broken. We didn't get the results, and we need to collectively get together again and we need to figure out how to make it better. I would say that again, I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush. I think typically the mindset in North America is we need to recruit better, or we need a coach that's going to attract more talent. We don't go back to, we have this agency where we control, like, we're the ones that are going to influence the
Yeah.
talent that we develop.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that I notice, maybe, and this for me would be more in North America because I don't have nearly the experience you have going all over these different places, but there seems to be confusion even among the coaches of what is appropriate for what demographic, what is appropriate for what age group, what should be focused on at what age group. So, for example, if in a minor hockey or youth hockey system in Ontario, if you get a guy that comes down from the NHL, let's say, and he's going to get involved with this organization, everybody's like, unreal. Like, this is exactly what we need. And maybe, but maybe not, because to your point, what if this guy can't speak to 8-year-olds? What if he can't speak to 12-year-olds? What if he doesn't have the tool set? What if he's too professional, where it's like he's too far beyond where he can't relay that message from the top down?
Well, I think the first thing that happens oftentimes is the parents think that's awesome, right? Because now their kids doing, they're doing defensive zone coverage drills with their 9-year-olds, and they think that this is perfect, right? And the equivalent is like, gosh, can you imagine taking like a university professor and putting him in front of a group of 5-year-olds? Like, it wouldn't go well, right?
Exactly.
But we do that in sports and youth sports, and we think like, oh, this is just our kids getting fast tracked, right? So I think so much of coaching, especially at the youth levels, is what you say no to. And I also think like ultimately we are what we measure. In North America, like the only thing we measure is what's on the scoreboard. So that's how we measure progress, right? Like measure progress. Are we winning or are we losing? I think the top organizations in the world, and again, I think predominantly a lot of these are in Europe and very much influenced by other sports such as soccer. They have really clear benchmarks at the end of every year. Like the coaches know that you're not being evaluated on wins and losses. You're being evaluated on, did you teach kids how to use their outside edge? Can your kids catch a puck on their backhand? And they break those skills down and they measure them. So there's results, and that's what the coaches are aspiring to do. They're trying to build those kids up, their individual skills, and there's a real trust that ultimately, again, I think this is so true in youth sports. At the end of the day, I'm going to put my money on the team with the most talent or with the best skill set, with the most players with the best skill set. Yeah. And that's going to win over time. Like I have yet to see a really good example. A couple years ago, I used to be the hockey director of the North Shore Winter Club. And so this would have been in 2020. I coached our Pee Wee AAA team. We went out to the Quebec tournament. Teams from all over the place. And we had a really good team. And I believe it was like in the quarterfinals, we played this team, the Czech Knights. So just as an example, like the Czech World Junior team this year that went to the gold medal game, I think it was 3/4 of their roster played on the Czech Knights as kids. And I'm watching these kids, and I'm like, I would go to scout them before we play them. I'm like, oh my god, it literally looked like they had a kid that looked like Evgeny Malkin playing center. I'm like, they're so good. And so I remember talking to the parents, like, how are we going to beat them? What are we going to do? And I'm like, what do they do? And I'm like, they just play hockey, and they just skate really fast, and they can handle the puck with their head up, and so now they can see where each other are on the ice, and they just make plays. And when I do presentations, I've got this clip of them in the gold medal game, and the puck goes into their end. There's clearly no structure, but then one kid picks the puck up off the wall, dishes a nice pass, kid gets going full speed, beats the defender, 2-on-1 backhand sauce pass. Yeah. I'm like, you just know that you don't defend that, know? And I'm like, so I think like that's, there's so much pressure, I think, on coaches now. Like it sounds simple. I think it's really tough to do. But I think like that, again, that's the secret sauce is you just got to be really clear on, you don't need to teach kids 12 things a season. You just need to be really clear that, I'm going to focus on 2 or 3 things. We're going to get tons of reps. We're going to practice it through small area games, through individual drills. And we're just going to get so good at those 3 things. And then I'm going to pass those kids off to Eric. And Eric knows the 3 things he has to build them up in.
Yeah. So it is much, as you said earlier, it's a lot like a education system, like an actual curriculum, like we're following a curriculum to get these measurables. So are there, from that perspective, are there things that you feel are heavily focused on now? Obviously, it would be dependent on what the age group is, but are there things that are a heavy focus now that maybe weren't so much a few years ago? Or have you seen a big change in what coaches are focusing on, generally speaking? Or does it seem like it's much the same and we don't have to fix something that's not broken?
I think overall, and a lot of this is through the privatization of hockey over here, just with the amount of skill coaches. I mean, listen, if you go watch a U11 game now, I mean, these kids are just off the charts how talented they are. And like I said, what I don't want to do is paint a picture like we're not doing a good job in North America, because the skill level of players overall is again, it's off the charts. I think what we do have here though, like we've got, 500,000 kids play hockey in Canada, like 70,000 play hockey in Finland, but we meet them in,
Yeah, meet them in the
gold medal,
finals,
yeah.
man. Yeah,
So
it's amazing.
so I think it's the efficiency, I guess, is what, probably the data point that you look at. But I think that, yeah, kids are super talented. I think that, kids now, I think just from, it starts with the skating, the access they get to skating. And I think that I just think of something as simple as like edge work. Like, I don't think I ever grew up and did any sort of like edge work. I didn't even know what that was. But I think, it starts with that. Kids have a really good foundation with their feet. And I think just through video, etc., I think kids, like, their puck skills, are just so advanced. I think the other thing that we're seeing too is, I think the trend that is really becoming prevalent is learning through play, learning through chaos, and small area games. I'll give you an example. I went and watched the University of Michigan practice yesterday. All they did was a series of small area games the entire practice, and those kids went all out. They were having a blast. They were hooting and hollering, but there was just and it was, I think they probably played at least half a dozen like different games. So they just went from one end to the other, back and forth. And I mean, I think when we talk about the creativity, I think one of my favorite quotes of all time, it was Tom Rennie, who used to be the CEO of Hockey Canada, and it was at the World Championships. They do a coaching symposium every year that we sponsor, and it was in Copenhagen. And his quote was, "The hardest thing to defend is creativity." And it's like, if you're coaching your kids to be predictable, you're doing them a disservice.
Yeah, man. So it's funny you said that. I literally wrote that down as like a next question. So what I'm picturing with 2 points. One is, so if I'm talking about, you're talking about edge work, for example, if you're doing, so let's say you're 7 learning how to skate, what I don't want people to necessarily think is we're talking military camp where you got a line of cones up both sides of the ice, and for an hour, all you're doing is tight turns to the left with these kids the whole time. So my question was going to be, one, is it that? Are we talking about them doing that in some of these other systems? Is it literally like old school Russian style, like beat it into their heads? What is a modern skill development look like from what you've seen? And then tailing with that is the concept of more is always better. And how does that play into how these kids train? Is it literally 7 days a week they're on the ice? Because I think we get a little bit of that runaway train effect here, where it's like, I need to go to my skill development in the morning, then I need to skate at lunchtime between classes at school, and then I need to go play my games at night, and all day, every day with a 10-year-old. So kind of those two things, how do you see those?
Yeah, so I'll start with sort of the frequency of being on the ice. I think all the science, all the data, all the results of the players that make it would suggest that playing multiple sports, having multiple activities, and that just doesn't mean like playing other sports. That means like putting your kid in an art camp, like letting them learn how to play the piano. That stuff has a incredible influence on athletes. Case in point, like a lot of Division I football programs now, like Alabama, Ohio State, like they don't recruit you if all you've done is play football in high school. They want multi-sport athletes, and it's not because they're trying to makes them feel good. It's because they have the data that says those players excel more, and they develop into better players. And I think the other part that we're seeing is just physiologically, like we got to remember, like our bodies are like a machine, and like any other machine, if you drive them too hard, they will break down. I mean, it doesn't take. I mean, I would encourage any parent, just do a quick Google search on there's 12-year-olds getting sports hernia surgeries now. That did not happen 20 years ago. It just did not happen. Those are all overuse injuries. And it's not just in hockey, it's in every sport. You're getting teenagers getting Tommy John surgery because, they've been pitching nonstop since they were like little kids. So I think, there's one part, it's like, hey, again, the data would suggest that more isn't better. I think deliberate practice is really important. I think creating space for your kids to, if you're fortunate, to live in a part of the world where you get access to, outdoor rinks, for example, like just let your kids go play. And I would say, just as an aside, another thing that we have found with the top organizations in the world is they create space for play. There's no adults on the ice, and their kids just get to go out there without any constraints and just play. And we don't think of that as development. That is absolutely development. And I think that, I think as for families and parents out there, and for obviously anybody running development programs as well, I think it's just being really clear on the outcome and making sure that you have a plan, because we live in a system, especially in North America right now, that if you want your kid on the ice twice a day, you can do that. Right. And I'm a parent, right? Like we all want to do what's best for our kids. And sometimes, doing more feels like the right thing. I just think it's really important to say, like, we're going to have a plan, we're going to have a schedule, and we're going to stick to that. And we're just going to be, we're not going to get distracted by all the other things out there.
Yeah. Cause I think it turns into like that, keep up with the Joneses kind of thing too, right? Like you get, when there isn't clear direction or a clear curriculum, or if you go to your minor hockey organization and they say this is what it's going to be, then it kind of ends up going back to the parents. Like they kind of have to figure it out. Like, what should I be doing? Where should I be going? What should I be? How should I be training? And even for young kids, it's like, well, Billy over there has his private skating coach, and maybe we should check that out. And it's like now you start getting pulled in all these different directions because there are so many skills coaches and all these different things, right?
Eric, do you have kids?
No.
This is the most powerful drug in the world. You hear comments all the time in sports. It's like they're just trying to get their kid to the NHL. I don't think that's the case. I think most parents are rational enough to know that, that is a pipe dream. It's the 1% of the 1%. I don't think parents are spending all this money and time with their kids because they want them to get to the NHL. There is a drug where if you're at a hockey rink, a minor hockey game, and your kid gets a hat trick, that rush of going into that lobby after the game and having all the other parents be like, "Oh man, Eric had a good game today. Wow, Eric's so good."
Yeah,
I'll tell you what.
That's interesting.
For any parents out there, if you don't believe in that, you're full of shit.
Yeah,
that's a drug, and I think that really drives people. You want that self gratification, and you feel like, "Oh, I'm doing my kid. How it's great for my kid." And again, I'm a parent too. Like we're all human beings, and that's a natural reaction. My point of the story is that we have to guard against that. If you're the adult, then you got to be the adult, because just because your kid wants candy all the time doesn't mean you give him candy. Just because there's an opportunity to get on the ice all the time, you got to be the adult and say, hey, like we've defined what the right amount is, and we're cool with that.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, because we get so many comments from people that say that exact thing. Like these parents just want to get their kids to the NHL, and I think that's a good way of putting it. Like I've never heard someone say in those terms. Like it's just like a drug for parents to get that pat on the back about like your kid's doing a great job and we love your kid and he's the best player and this kind of stuff. And then the other element too, like I had a parent explicitly say this to me one time, like hockey is our family entertainment, because that's what we do every weekend, all weekend. So we want it to be good. We want it to be.
That's another great point.
You know what I mean? So like between those two things, I don't think it's so much, I think Johnny's getting to the NHL. It's more just like, that's where I'm at right now and I'm getting sucked into it, right?
And listen, man, it's everything. Like my little guy is going to be 6 next month. Like when he was 3 and did a finger painting, like we thought he was Picasso. We put it on the fridge. We bragged about it, took pictures, sent it to the grandparents. Like it's normal, right?
Yeah, that's so funny. That's so funny. So on that, I know you and I were talking a little bit on the weekend about how a lot of the questions that we get, and for our audience, they ask, the coaches and the parents ask the same questions. So whether it's a training thing, a coaching thing, just a day-to-day thing, how they deal with certain circumstances, they'll say, hey, I'm a parent of this age kid, or they'll say, hey, I coach this age group. And then the next line is the same question doesn't matter who it was, right? So for you guys, from the coach's side perspective, because um, I I believe that coaching and parenting are much the same. You can kind of flip a coin whether you call it parenting, coaching. It's kind of the same thing. So from the coach's side perspective, for the parents listening, what is it about the coach's site that you think is specifically valuable? Where if I'm a coach and go on there, or if I'm a parent or I go on there, what do I find? What am I learning? How's it going to help me navigate whatever I'm going through with my kids? Maybe.
Yeah, for sure. And I would just say this, like the one thing that I've come to appreciate about coaching, and I think, in parenting as well, is that when done right, coaching is going to bring out the best version of you, and parenting will do the same thing. Like whatever bad habits you have before you have kids, you're probably going to get rid of them because your kids are going to be the number one priority. And same thing with coaching. If you're in it for the right reasons, it's you're gonna show up the best version of yourself at the rink. Um, I think as far as what we do, I would say like specifically with the coaches, when I was coming up, every coach had a binder, and in that binder was like, drills, scribble on practice plans, and drills are great. And I would say like if we looked at our search queries, it's drills, drills, drills. People love drills. Coaches love drills. Um, you know, Drills are like it's like handing you and I each a paintbrush and a palette with a bunch of different colors on it. Just because we have those tools doesn't mean we're gonna both go out and paint the same picture. Like the drills, I think are largely overrated. I think what we do at the coaches site is we provide the why and the how. It's how to teach. So an example of that might be like if we had a group of coaches in here right now and I said, how do you teach crossovers? I can just about guarantee that some coaches are going to put their hand up and they're going to be like, oh, you just like skate around the circle and you cross over. Then you go to the next circle and you cross over. That's not how you teach crossovers. You teach crossovers because you explain to kids that they've got to get their inside shoulder up and back. You teach them because they align their belly button with the inside knee. You teach them when they cross over to point their toe that they imagine cutting their laces with their skate that's crossing over. You have very specific teaching cues, and that's what I think that we provide. I think from a parent's perspective, I think we give them some peace of mind because I think they get to come in here and they get to say, you know what, like we got the best coaches in the world. And we're fortunate, man. Like we work with the best of the best, and it's a privilege. But I think it gives them peace of mind when you got the best people in the world that say, hey, your kid just needs to focus on this right now, or you don't need to worry about D-zone coverage. You don't need to worry about the wins and losses. Like if you want to create the best experience for your kid and at the same time give them the best opportunity to be the best player they can be, then slow down, work on the fundamentals, and and do them again and again and again because reps remove doubt.
Yeah, and I think it's nice to hear that perspective of just have some patience too. Like it's gonna take some time and like just relax and slow down. What within the site too though, like because I've been through it myself, obviously. What would you say about like the variety, like different types of coaches, different coaching styles that you guys have? Like because there's so many different ways that people absorb information and learn. And like, is there anything that stands out particularly about that variety that you guys have and how that provides value to the people that are there?
For sure. I think that, it's very similar. I think what's great about the coaches site, and particularly now with our new platform, because coaches, the users can upload their own content. So it's just, it's literally, there's two parts. Sometimes I worry there's too much information because then coaches feel like they have to do it all and they don't. And that's certainly not the objective. But I think what's great is that, we'll go back to that crossover example. If you went on the coach site right now and typed in crossovers into the search bar, you're not going to get one way of doing it. You're probably going to get 20. And there's no right way. Like we're all going to gravitate towards teaching methodology, a philosophy that makes sense for us that we're comfortable with. There's not one way to teach your kids math, right? I think what's really important as coaches is that we find our own unique way. We find our own unique way of teaching all the details. And I think more than anything is we understand the steps involved. And I think so often coaches, again, especially at the youth levels, is they try and fit all the details into one drill, and they expect the kids that, hey, I'm going to introduce this new concept and we're going to do this drill for 8 minutes, and by the end of it the kids are going to figure it out. They're probably not. But what you might do is say for 8 minutes, we're going to work on one step. And again, this goes back to, you don't have to teach them everything in a year. Maybe pick 2 or 3 things and get really good at that. We maybe teach a step for 8 minutes and we come back the next practice and we work on the next step. Or maybe we have to go back to that first one and we're going to build this over time. But man, like when we talk about, I'll give you an example, like at the NHL level, like your posture as a skater, if you don't develop good posture when you're a young kid, I don't care how many goals you get, I don't care what numbers you put up in Pee Wee, you will not play at a high level. If we think that as coaches, we're just going to tell a group of initiation players to like bend their knees and get their chin up never once, that is like gaining good posture as a hockey player. That is a result of coaches, repeating over and over again. It's like trying to get your kids to take their elbows off the dinner table. It's probably not a one-time conversation, or you don't tell your kid to clean his room once and he's like, okay, got it. You're going to tell them that well into their teenage years. And it's the same thing with these details, man. You got to intentionally create the space to go back to it, be patient. But again, you can do everything right. But if kids don't have those fundamentals, like the game gets really hard when they get
older. Well, it's cool because even like being at some of the events and seeing some of the stuff online, like you said, you've talked to so many cool people. It's not even necessarily a particular coach, but you just have so many different speakers that are there. Are there any, like the one that stood out to me, we were at St. Andrews and you have the freaking Leafs GM come out. It's like, dude, that's wild, right? So like what stands out to you? Were there any particular individuals that had a specific message in your time doing this that have been like, wow, like that is a really unique perspective, or that is something that will be really valuable that people don't understand coming from like a high level type of person in the industry?
Oh man, like that's such a loaded question. You know what? There's so many, and a lot of the presentations that have stood out to me. I think the one thing that's unique about us is sometimes it's the coaches that maybe aren't at the highest level that are more apt to share or to maybe think outside the box a little bit.
Interesting. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I mean, I'll just look back at this past year. So like one of our most top 5 posts, I think number 5 was Pete DeBoer talking about his offensive zone habits and how they play in Dallas, and it's awesome. And when you hear Pete DeBoer, I think that's another thing too. Like good coaches, like NHL coaches, they make the complex simple. Like their communication skills are remarkable. And it's intentional. It's practice. I would say that's probably what they spend the most time thinking about, is how they're going to clearly explain something efficiently. So that's great. You got Pete DeBoer, but like when you look at the other like top 5 presentations, the only big name coaches in that top 5 were Pete DeBoer, Brendan Arado, head coach of Michigan, and then the other 3 posts were from our users. And
really?
Yeah, and it's just like outside the box stuff.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. And I think what's really cool is you have these coaches, and I would say that it's a lot of like really granular, aspects of the game. And I think that, listen, man, like this is one thing I've learned, and I double down on this. Coaching is an art form. It is not a science. There's not one way to do it. There is an incredible amount of creativity in this, both in terms of how you develop players, the drills you do, how you keep things engaging, but also in how you communicate with players so that your message is just as engaging in just as engaging in February as it was in September. And that's not, and if you think that you're going to say the same thing the same way in February as you did in September, you're probably going to lose your players' attention to a certain degree.
Yeah, well, it's cool because they like you said, it's an interesting thing that I'm realizing too, when you get engagement from people that are involved with, whether it's for us, the podcast, for you guys on the coach's site, is you kind of get to crowdsource input from anyone. So you actually can get valuable insights from some guy, like, you know what I mean? Like and sometimes, like you said, sometimes it could be too much information to a degree, but like you get that one key piece that somebody who you would have never had access to, and all of a sudden it pops up as a top 5 search. Like that could have been lost and no one would have ever heard that or seen that. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I would say like, that's, I think what's kind of cool with like our new platform now is that we have these coaches that like nobody's ever heard of. And that was really the intention, but like the community gets to vote. So you might have a coach that posts something without thinking about it, but if enough people like they engage with it, they like it, they share it, then that's gonna that's gonna rise to the top. And I do have like just going back to your earlier question about this would probably be I think this applies to all coaches, and it's such a good lesson. It's something that's impacted me. I've only met Paul Maurice once. I had some buddies that coached with him in Winnipeg, and this story makes a lot of sense because, like, I think a lot of these head coaches, like, they're just it's almost intimidating the standard they live their life to.
Really?
Like when I don't think I was special, but when I talked to Paul Maurice, I felt like the most important person in the room. I can just about guarantee that everybody he talks to feels that same way. Like I bet you when Paul Maurice goes to get a carton of milk in Fort Lauderdale, the person behind the till feels like $1,000,000.
Yeah, yeah.
So my friends were coaching Winnipeg, and they had this story. Again, I'm gonna get the years foggy, but the Jets went to the conference finals. So this is like probably around 2018, maybe. The next year they don't make the playoffs. And so they have the story. They're like, okay, like how do you go from the Western Conference Finals to not making the playoffs? And so they had this idea. Paul Maurice puts up in the coach's office like a chart, and it's got like the coaches' names on one side, and it's got the players on the other side. And it's got like little boxes, right? And he gives the coaches bingo dabbers, and says, "Hey, when you leave the office every day, I want you to take the bingo dabbers, and I want you to put a spot beside every player who you had a meaningful conversation with." And they defined what that was. But I think, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but it was basically like a conversation not related to hockey, like
Yeah,
how you
I've heard
doing,
this
how's your
story.
family, all this stuff.
Yes.
And so they did that, and they realized that they were spending a lot of time really having those conversations with the younger kids on the team, trying to help them up. And they would kind of ignore the older guys because, of course, they're veterans and they've already had that relationship. And so they changed it, forced them to change. And they really started being intentional about creating that space to have conversations, like when players showed up at the rink, being in the dressing room more. And, and the next year they got back on track. And that's what they really credited it to. And I think that, this is very much a human business. And, Emily Castonguay is an assistant GM with the Vancouver Canucks, and she came from an agent background, so obviously has those conversations with the players. And when her opening press conference with the Canucks, and I love this, she said, "I truly believe a team is only as good as the players feel when they show up at the rink." I think that is true at all levels. Like if you're not making, I don't care, how skilled you are as a coach, if your kids aren't jacked up to come to the rink, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. Well, like for us, communication is I live and die by it, man. Like if one thing that always shocks me is being relatively early on, like getting into this like every day, all day as my job. I'm shocked by what the kids will remember about what you say to them.
Totally.
So like I'll get a kid like the one example I remember from several years ago. I had a kid in the off season. We were talking about meal plan stuff, and I'm giving him some like random details about whatever food thing I'm talking about. And to me, it's like a second nature thing. I'm thinking nothing of it, whatever. And then at the end of the conversation, we had like a little input about like some social, I forget the exact details, but it was about like a social interaction I had with someone, and I was telling them the story just in passing. So I just spent like an hour talking about meal plans, nutrition stuff. At the end of my conversation, I gave them like this little side story about a social interaction I had. A year later, this kid recalled that moment from that conversation and said it back to me. Like,
Yeah.
I remember when you told me this story, like that this thing happened. And I'm like, how do you remember? Like, that was so not important to what anything I was saying. And so if you're not doing like the Paul Maurice, where you're giving people that space and that time where they feel important and feel good, you don't know what you say that will stick with them. Like, you don't know which thing it's going to be. It might not be the thing you think. So if you are having these conversations with whether it's kids or pros or adults or other parents or coaches, like it's really important that you pay attention to that stuff, because you never know what it is going to be about what you say that sticks with them, And I think that's a huge thing that we preach all the time.
Yeah, like no doubt. And I think we all have to remember, it's like, when we go to the conference, we got a lot of high level coaches there. Like, I'm being honest, like, yeah, it's pretty cool to have a, 5-minute stop and chat with like some of these big name coaches. You learn a lot. It's exciting. I guarantee I remember those conversations a lot more than they do. But I always reflect on like that interaction as an adult. Those are the same interactions I had with my youth coaches, right? Like I thought it was a big deal when my hockey coach took 2 minutes just to talk to me about anything. And like case in point, like a couple weeks ago, my little guy plays soccer. We had a little kid walk. We were playing a game. He starts walking off the field. I go up to him like, "Hey, like, what's going on? Are you thirsty? You need to go to the bathroom?" And he's like, "I'm just really sad." I'm like, "What's going on?" He's like, "I'm getting bullied at school." I'm not a social worker, but I better show up. I better show that I care. And none of us get that type of training in our coaching. But like that's just, I think that goes out to like, coaching is going to force you to be the best version of yourself, and you're going to follow up and text mom and dad and say, "How's he doing?" And let them know that that team environment is a safe place.
Yeah, it's just being a good human, man. Because it is your point, man. It's a human game. Like the interactions are human things, man.
Listen, I could tell you like the most influential things for me are like, do you remember Jim Playfair?
I do.
Yeah, like coaching the NHL, coaches with Prince George in the Western League now, but he used to be the head coach of the Abbotsford Heat, Calgary's farm team. And he went viral on the internet because he went like full Hulk on the bench in a game and broke sticks.
I remember the video. Yeah.
Yeah, so like you watch that video and you get a perception of Jim Playfair. So a couple of weeks before that happened, I was in his office, and he's got this like big book out, and I don't even know how we got on the subject, but just ask him about like routine stuff like that. So he's got this book, and he's like, "Oh yeah, this is like my daughter's journal." And I'm like, "Oh, why do you have your daughter's journal on your coaching desk?" He's like, "No." He's like, "It's my journal for my daughter." He's like, "I've got a journal for every one of my kids, and I keep them, and I'm going to give them each of them on their wedding day. So since they were little kids, I've got this journal, just memories, things we've done, thoughts I've had, and stuff like that." And that's that discipline. And I'm looking at that, I'm like, wow, that's crazy. So I would say that like, listen, I don't want to set too high of a bar. We've all heard that expression, like how you do anything is how you do everything. But again, I think this is very much a human business, and it is very much about just being a good person and finding ways. Like nobody's perfect, but it's are you looking for ways to improve, to better connect with people. And I think for anybody that volunteers their time coaching and has done it for a long time will speak to the influence it's had on them in their life, because you're just always going to try and get a little bit better. You know what I mean? And that's the beauty of this.
Yeah, for sure, man. So where do you see the coach side going? For talking, like give a time horizon, 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, and are there any trends that you're kind of latching onto right now, where you see kind of whether it's hockey or otherwise, where you see the games are going, or what coaches need generally?
Yeah, I think like in for our purposes, like we're very much we launched a new platform in October 10th of last year. We had 12,000 users when we turned it on, and we've got over 28,000 now. So it's like over 20% of the global hockey coaching population's on that platform. And that's from like NHL coaches down to, parents volunteering to coach their 6-year-old. So, we really focus on, from a tech perspective, it's great that we've got these presentations from like really high level coaches at our conference, and we produce a ton of content. And, that's certainly been our bread and butter in the past, but we really look at, how can we create tools to make it easier for coaches to share their best ideas and get that out in the community. So, if there's a coach in Sweden today that, has a great drill for teaching, backhand saucer passes, we can get that out to like literally coaches around the world, and they can, run with it tomorrow. And then we also look at how do we save content, and just going back to that concept of, creating curriculums and really taking everything that coaches traditionally had in like an old school binder. Content's not written on paper anymore. It's not in any industry. And, content it's video based. It's found on YouTube. It's found on Instagram. People have clips on their hard drive. People can easily go and chop up an NHL game. People pull out their cell phones at NHL practices. Like there's just this variety of content. So we really think about how do we take that binder and let it exist in the cloud so that every coach or any organization can consolidate all that content in one place. They can share it amongst themselves, whether that's coaches within an organization or just coaches that connect within our community. And how can they organize it in a meaningful way? And that might be in a progression that includes like sort of an NHL clip of a player, protecting the puck, showing drills, video drills on how to teach it through a progression that they can then share with other coaches. But it might also be an organization that creates a season-long development plan for their U8 coaches to follow. And so that's really where our focus is. And I think at the end of the day, like, we believe that as grassroots organizations, you can do everything right? Like you can have like your schedule totally dialed, you can have like the best fundraising programs, you can have like the coolest swag out there. You can do everything right. If the coaches don't deliver a great experience for the kids, none of it matters. Like, coaches are the gatekeepers. So I think that's where our focus is we really believe that sports unites people. A positive experience with sport is going to stick with a child for the rest of their life. And if we can empower coaches to be great leaders, and listen, man, if I go to a rink and I see a coach that's having a great time on the ice, I guarantee the kids are having a great time on the ice. If we can take the stress out of it for coaches and maybe make it a little bit easier to plan their practice, to just show up and do their thing and connect with their kids, we think that we can, that's kind of our contribution to society.
No, that's sick, man. Awesome. Well, I'm fired up. I'm fired up for your Ann Arbour event coming up. The St. Andrews one was sweet enough, and that's nothing compared to.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. You're gonna have a blast. Like, St. Andrews was great. It was one day. Obviously we just hung out in Ann Arbour for the football game this weekend, but it's 3 full days. Last year we had 500 coaches, 14 countries attend. And everybody's the same. Doesn't matter what level you coach. Like the presenters, they're at the after hours events just like everybody else, and it's very much just immersive experience. You're going to learn a ton from the presenters, but I really think that the true magic in it is you're going to meet coaches from around the world. You're going to develop relationships, and you're going to be having Zoom calls and picking up the phone and picking their brain throughout the year. And again, I think the best coaches in the world, like, it's your continuous work in progress to get better at your craft. So we love that we get to play a small part in that.
Yeah, sweet, man. So Instagram's the coach's site and website.
We're not hard to find. The coach's site is our handle on just about everything. You can go to thecoachessite.com. You can sign up for free user account. We've got a lot of players and parents that are on the platform as well. It's just an easy place to go and pick up information. And for anybody, if you're interested in coming to TCS Live at the University of Michigan, go to TCS Live, and you can buy tickets now. Have a blast.
Awesome, man. I appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy, so we'll get you back to Squamish.
There you go. En route, man. Cheers.